James was never one to raise his voice. He never needed speeches or spotlights. He spent his whole life with his hands in the dirt and his feet planted firmly on the ground. Literally. Raised among hoes and old trucks, he learned early on that the world doesn't forgive hesitation, but also never forgets those who keep their word. He faced a hard life, where effort wasn't a choice. It was survival. He was pushed aside because of prejudice, overlooked because of how he looked, and underestimated more times than he could count. But he kept going. He held on to a promise in his heart for 3 decades. And when a moment finally came to fulfill it, he didn't shout. He just acted. And with 7 pickup trucks, 7 quiet gestures, and a kind of faith you can't buy, James moved an entire town and left behind a lesson even time wouldn't dare erase. But the most surprising part was still to come. It was a hot, heavy morning in the countryside, the kind where the sun feels like it could melt even the trees' shadows. At the glass door of the busiest dealership in town, a man walked slowly but with purpose. His face carried the marks of time and the land. His hands, calluses that spoke louder than any resume. His clothes were wrinkled, boots caked with dust, and a worn-out backpack hung from his shoulder. But what really stood out about James wasn't something quick eyes could catch. It was a quiet dignity, the kind only a hard life can shape. And it was with that quiet dignity that he opened the door and said calmly, "Good morning, gentlemen. I came to look at some pickup trucks." The blast of air conditioning clashed immediately with the heat outside, but the real chill came from the stairs. The salesmen, crisp in their white shirts and perfectly styled hair, paused for a second to size up the stranger. One whispered. Another smirked. Christopher, the most experienced and the most arrogant, looked up from his computer and threw out 7 pickup trucks, paid in full. The question, dripping with sarcasm, landed like a jab. But James didn't flinch. He simply nodded, polite as ever. And then came a silence so loud it echoed across the room. 7 trucks. Planning to start an army, joked one of the guys in the back, earning a few muffled laughs. James didn't answer. He just opened his backpack, pulled out a beat-up folder, and calmly walked over to the counter. He acted like he couldn't hear the mockery, and maybe he couldn't. Or maybe he just heard it so many times, he'd learned how to turn it into fuel. And he had. His faith ran deep, forged in years of planting hope in dry soil and harvesting dignity from the ashes of disrespect. Life had taught him to stay quiet on the outside while roaring on the inside. And that's exactly what he was doing now. It was in this judgmental, almost toxic atmosphere that Daniel stepped forward. Young, newly hired, his eyes still untouched by the arrogance that infects so many in sales. He walked toward James with a shy but genuine smile. "Can I help you, sir? Would you like some coffee?" James looked him straight in the eyes and replied, softly, "I'd like that. And thank you for seeing me." Those words, said so plainly, cut through Daniel like nothing else. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would change more than just his workday. It would change how he saw people. Because some encounters seem ordinary until you realize the silence is carrying a story too deep for words. While Daniel poured the coffee, the others pretended to work, but they couldn't take their eyes off James. He started asking technical questions, the kind only someone with real hands-on experience would know. He talked about torque, reinforced suspension, four-wheel drive, like someone who knows more about muddy roads than most there knew about paved ones. Christopher scoffed, rolled his eyes, and whispered to a colleague, "Probably got those calluses pretending to be a farmer." But even with the growing sarcasm, James stayed calm. His steady posture wasn't pride, it was resilience. The dealership, shiny and polished, smelled of expensive cologne and burnt coffee. But what really filled the air was judgment. People were sizing James up like a bad joke. Appearances ruled the room like a silent virus. And James, with his disarming calm, was the quiet antidote. While others pushed the boundaries of arrogance, he was testing his own patience. "I'm looking for 7 identical ones. Black, if you have them," he said. No raised voice, no demands. Just quiet clarity. And when truth comes from someone who's fought hard for everything, it doesn't need volume. It's loud in the eyes. Daniel was starting to feel uneasy. Not because of James, but because of the atmosphere. Something was off. Cruel, even. The way they mocked a man, just for how he looked, was beyond wrong. Still, he held it together. Kept answering, explaining, writing things down. And all the while, James watched. Not the vehicles, but the people. He could read them instantly. Not by name, but by attitude. Because when you've spent a lifetime having to prove your worth, it only takes a moment to know who's worth your trust. Between spec sheets and quiet pauses, Daniel took a chance. "Are you from around here?" he asked. James smiled slightly. "Used to be. Now I just passed through." The response hung in the air like an unsolved riddle. Daniel realized then, this wasn't just a guy shopping for trucks. This was someone carrying a story. One of those you don't tell to just anyone. One of those you save for someone who's willing to listen, not just sell. And right there, without really knowing why, Daniel felt he wanted to hear that story. In the corner, Christopher kept spreading his sarcasm. "I bet he'll be asking for a ride home any minute now," he said, pulling laughter from two co-workers. But even then, James didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on the trucks. Not because he wanted to show off, but because they meant something. A promise. One made long ago, in the mud, under the blazing sun, alongside men who never left him behind. It was time to deliver, but not time to explain. Some things require waiting, and he knew how to wait. Daniel, meanwhile, was starting to understand that this would be no ordinary morning. Something about James, the way he moved, the way he didn't speak, stirred something in him. And before he even realized it, he'd chosen a side, the side of empathy. Because while some judge a man by his boots, others see what's behind his eyes. And in James's eyes, Daniel saw strength, determination, faith. A man who had clearly overcome more than most. And even without knowing the full story yet, Daniel could feel it. Something was about to change. As Daniel calmly presented the truck models, James examined each one with quiet focus, like someone with no intention of rushing. He didn't pick with the excitement of a first-time buyer, but with the calm of a man who knew exactly what he needed. He checked the details, tested the door weight, leaned on the seats with the hand of someone who's lived behind the wheel. "Does this one have low-range gear?" he asked, lifting the hood like he was checking on an old friend. Daniel nodded, explaining the specs. And between man and machine, something deeper was being built. Respect. In the back of the dealership, the whispering continued. One of the guys, more mocking than the rest, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe he's delivering firewood to the prison." The comment was followed by a short, dry, cowardly laugh. Daniel heard it, but ignored it. So did James. Not out of weakness, but by choice. Both had learned, in their own ways, that not every noise deserves a response. When you've been through a hard life, other people's noise becomes background. What matters is the quiet persistence to keep moving forward. "Are these trucks for dirt road use, Mr. James?" Daniel asked, trying to spark a bit of conversation. James closed the brochure carefully and answered without hesitation. "No, they're gifts." Daniel's eyes widened. "Gifts?" he repeated, like he hadn't heard it right. "7 trucks?" James simply nodded, keeping the mystery. There was no pride in his voice, no bragging, just the calm certainty of a man carrying a promise in his chest, and the kind of faith that turns memory into action. Not a religious faith, but a faithful memory, a sacred one. The tension in the room rose when Christopher walked over, smiling with his mouth but not his eyes. "Do you have a way to prove you're serious about this purchase?" he asked, arms crossed, dripping with sarcasm. Daniel tried to step in. "It's okay, Christopher. I'm working with him." But Christopher pressed on, just tried to avoid wasting time with fairy tales. James didn't flinch. He simply reached into his pocket and laid down a bank document, stamped and signed, showing a balance that made Christopher swallow hard. It was more than enough to buy those trucks, and then some. What followed was a silence, so thick you could cut it with a knife. One of the guys who'd mocked James suddenly became very focused on his computer. Another flipped through brochures with shaky hands. Daniel glanced at the document and took a deep breath. "Would you like to continue the deal with me, sir?" he asked, almost unsure of what he was hearing. James looked up and replied, with a mix of quiet strength and grace, Yes. You were the only one who treated me like a person when I walked in. It was the first time Daniel had ever felt chosen, not by chance but by worth. That sentence echoed inside him like a simple, honest melody. You were the only one who treated me like a person. It may have sounded small, but in that moment, in that room, it meant everything. Daniel didn't know much about James's life, but all it took was a look at his hands, his walk, his quiet presence, to know there was a story behind it all. A story of effort, of survival, of persistence stitched together with sweat. And when someone like that chooses you, it's not random. It means they saw something in you that matters most: humanity. Christopher backed off, ego bruised. For the first time, he wasn't the one closing the deal. He tried to smile, tried to recover, but James had already made up his mind. This wasn't about who had more experience. This was about dignity, about the difference between serving and belittling. As Daniel worked on the paperwork, the rest of the staff slowly dispersed, unsure of how to look at their own reflections in the dealership's shiny glass walls. That moment of quiet, public humility, it was just the beginning of a much-needed lesson in empathy. James spoke again, this time without hurry. I want 7. All the same. Diesel engine. 4-wheel drive. No fancy stuff. Just strength. Gotta handle mud, potholes, heavy loads. Daniel jotted everything down carefully, surprised by the confidence behind each request. Any color preference? He asked. Black. Like wet dirt after the rain. The answer came with a quiet poetry that made Daniel smile. This wasn't just a purchase. It was something deeper, something born from inside, the kind of thing only someone who's lived by faith and sweat can truly understand. As Daniel filled out the specs in the system, one question circled in his mind. Who's getting these trucks? And why? But he didn't dare ask. James didn't seem like the kind of man who opened up easily. He was more gesture than speech. And at that moment, everything pointed to something far bigger than a sale. This was a delivery, a settling of something old. A gesture of gratitude turned into a quiet victory. And even without fully understanding it yet, Daniel could feel it. Whatever was coming next was going to surprise him. The deal was nearly done. Daniel double-checked the proposal like someone handling a rare recipe. Meanwhile, James sat calmly, arms crossed, staring into the distance. But he wasn't really there anymore. He was far away, lost in the dust of the past. Back when Sundays meant working the land, dinner was scarce, and friends were survival brothers. Everything looks good, Mr. James. Do you want us to deliver the trucks to your place? Daniel asked gently. James took a breath and looked him in the eyes. No, I'll deliver them myself. One by one. Daniel raised an eyebrow, puzzled. You're going to deliver all 7 personally? James nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. This wasn't about logistics. It was about honor, a debt that couldn't be paid with invoices. And then, as if writing the final line of a long-kept story, he added, Saturday, Colombo Road. If you want to see what drives a real man, show up. Daniel tried to hide the emotion rising in his chest. But something stirred inside. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a riddle, almost a confession. And deep down, he knew he had to be there. With the order finalized and all VIN numbers recorded, James stood up with the same calm he had walked in with. The store manager, suddenly much friendlier, approached with a polite smile. But James simply nodded and said, all set. I left the deposit. I'll pay the rest on Saturday. Then he turned and walked out. No rush, no show. Just his old backpack over one shoulder and the quiet steps of a man who walks side by side with his own story. Daniel stood still, watching the glass door sway gently behind him, as if even the wind knew something extraordinary had just happened. The next day, the dealership didn't feel the same. The usual buzz was toned down. The salesman spoke less. Christopher, especially, was quieter than usual. And Daniel, though he said nothing, was clearly different too. He carried a strange tension, the kind you feel when you know something big is coming. Something rare. Something real. You seriously going to Colombo Road? A coworker asked, half joking. Daniel just smiled faintly. Yeah, you don't get invited to witness a story like that every day. Throughout the week, in between helping customers, Daniel kept thinking about what James had said. If you want to see what drives a real man, the words echoed in his mind like a challenge. He kept wondering, were the trucks for his sons? Business partners? Some charity project? But none of the guesses felt right. There was something deeper going on. Something built with persistence, with faith, with memories that time couldn't erase. Something that could probably only be understood in the dust of that road. Saturday arrived. Daniel got up early, grabbed a quick coffee, jumped in his car, and typed the destination into the GPS, Colombo Road. The first stretch was paved. Then came dirt. Then gravel. Then silence. His phone lost signal. Street signs vanished. It was like the modern world had been left behind. But Daniel kept going, alert, curious, and with the growing sense that this wasn't just about a delivery. Up ahead, a wooden gate appeared, marked with a horseshoe nailed right in the center. He stopped. He had found the place. On the other side of the fence, 7 black pickup trucks gleamed under the sun, lined up, identical, strong, like quiet soldiers ready to fulfill a mission. And leaning against the first truck was James, wearing a fresh shirt, a new straw hat, and a peaceful smile on his face. "Thought you weren't coming, son," he said. Daniel stepped out of the car, shook his hand, and stood there for a moment, silent. It was all real, and yet it felt unreal. "All this is for real?" he asked, still not quite believing what he was seeing. James simply replied, "The best part hasn't even started yet." They got in the first truck. James behind the wheel, Daniel in the passenger seat. The engine hummed low, like a tamed beast. And then, without warning, James began to speak. Not like someone boasting, but like someone opening up his heart, one layer at a time. "When I was young, I lived in a settlement with 6 other guys. Land was scarce, hunger was big, and all we had was this beat-up old truck for everything: feed, milk, hope." Daniel sat quietly, feeling the weight of every word. Because there, between the engine's purr and the dusty scent of the road, was a truth bigger than any sale. "We used to push it by hand when it broke down, rushed kids to the clinic in it, laughed in the mud up to our knees. We didn't have much, but we had loyalty," James continued. And that's when it hit Daniel. These trucks weren't just machines. They were symbols, chapters of a story built on hardship, effort, and quiet triumph. "That's why, Daniel, today's the day I pay back a promise. One I made a long time ago. Nobody knows about it, but I never forgot." As they followed the road, each bend seemed to bring them closer to a powerful reveal. Daniel's mind flooded with images he couldn't quite explain. Men working from sunrise to sunset. Friendships born in hardship. Promises whispered and kept in silence. Tears held back for years. This was bigger than him. Bigger than any monthly sales goal. Bigger than going viral online. This was soul. This was real. And in that very moment, as the truck bumped forward on the dirt path, Daniel realized he was about to witness something that doesn't happen twice in a lifetime. But what lay ahead couldn't yet be put into words. The pickup rumbled gently along the dusty road. James kept his eyes locked on the trail ahead. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy, meaningful, as if the words needed room to land with the weight they carried. "First stop's John's place," James said, like calling out for a brother. "He's the one who drove that old truck the night I almost lost my daughter during labor." Daniel glanced at the man beside him and saw something new. This wasn't just a farmer giving gifts. This was a man repaying debts that time itself hadn't managed to settle. They pulled up in front of a small wooden shack, simple, surrounded by plants that had grown wild, just like the lives of many who lived out there. An elderly man stepped outside slowly, shirt open, worn-out sandals, and a surprised look on his face. "John, remember me?" The question hung in the air for a long second. "James." The old man raised a hand to his mouth, choking on emotion. "I came to bring you a pickup truck." "Bring me what?" James pointed. "Right there. It's yours. Paid in full." The old man staggered. A woman appeared at the door and started to cry. "Is this a joke?" "No. It's gratitude." Daniel couldn't speak. It was real. It was powerful. And it was just the beginning. They went to the second house, then the third. At each stop, a reunion. A hug. A name pulled from the mud of memory. A piece of someone's soul returned with the turn of a key. There was too much effort in those calloused hands for anyone there to feel unworthy. Too much faith in each delivery for any words to do it justice. James didn't cry, but his eyes shimmered, as if he were holding the whole world inside his chest. The fourth delivery was for Garcia, a man James described as someone who could fix anything with a piece of wire and faith. Garcia came out holding his grandson. When he saw the truck, he made the sign of the cross, like he was witnessing a miracle. "But why, James?" he asked. "Because you never let me down. Not once. That was it. That was all. Pure gratitude. The kind that doesn't need a stage. Doesn't need applause. Just presence. Just memory. Just the quiet truth that good deeds, even silent ones, always find their way back, even down a dusty road." By the fifth delivery, Daniel wasn't trying to hold back anymore. Tears rolled down his cheeks without asking permission. He had never seen anything like it. Never felt such truth in gestures so simple. At each home, James didn't ask to come in. He just delivered, with both hands, with misty eyes, with the care of someone handing over a piece of their own story. Every key was a form of recognition. Every engine that started was a shared victory. Because no triumph means anything if you forget those who help you take your first steps. The sixth house belonged to Miller, the quietest of them all, according to James. Didn't talk much, but he was always the first to help push, he said. When Miller saw James, he didn't say a word. He simply dropped to his knees on the packed dirt. James knelt too, placed a hand on his shoulder, and whispered, "Now it's your turn to ride in comfort." Daniel captured it all with his eyes. His phone was in his pocket, but he knew no camera could ever capture what was happening there. Because what was unfolding wasn't content. It was a witness, a sacred moment. Finally, the last truck. They stopped at the top of a hill, near a small barn. James got out slowly, walked up to the final vehicle, and ran his hand across the hood. "This one's for me," he said, with a bittersweet smile. "Not out of vanity, but so that every time I hit the road, I remember it's worth walking with people who don't leave you behind." Daniel took a deep breath, throat tight. It felt like those words were meant for him too, because deep down, everyone there had been left behind at some point, by life, by luck, by hope. James didn't end with any big speech. He just offered coffee. They sat under the shade of a tree and stared at the 7 trucks. 7 machines lined up with the quiet strength of a silent army. Daniel said nothing. He just watched. Because in that place, on that afternoon, he learned that overcoming doesn't always come with noise. That hard work doesn't always get recognized. But true victories always come back to those who never forget the road that got them there. As the sun began to set, painting the fields in shades of orange, Daniel stood up. It was time to head back. But he wasn't leaving empty-handed. He carried something that doesn't fit in bags or on paper. He carried faith in people. He carried the certainty that there are still those who give back with their hearts. He carried a story that would stay with him forever. What he didn't know yet was that the days to come would change not only the dealership, but the whole town. Because when silence becomes an example, the world starts to listen. And that Saturday was far from over. On Monday morning, the dealership looked the same. Coffee at the counter, polished cars, cologne in the air. But something had shifted. A quiet buzz spread through the place. Whispers about a video that had started to make the rounds. Simple, raw footage filmed by Daniel on his phone. No editing, no filters. Just real images of the deliveries. The hugs. The keys handed over. The trembling hands. The dry tears on the faces of men who had faced life with more strength than words. Within hours, it had gone viral. WhatsApp groups, local Facebook pages, even a radio. Everyone was talking about James. At the store, the ones who had mocked him now avoided eye contact. Christopher, especially, walked with his shoulders down, steering clear of conversation. The manager walked into the sales floor with his phone in hand. The video reached headquarters. They want to honor Mr. James. And it's going to be here. Today, at 3 o'clock. A cold silence swept the room. "Here?" Christopher asked, barely audible. Daniel simply nodded and replied firmly, "I'll be the one to welcome him. It's the least I can do." Then he turned and got back to work, heart racing. When the clock struck 3 p.m., the store felt different. The cars were in their usual places, but the energy wasn't the same. Salespeople stood straight, eyes lowered, words scarce. The door opened, and James walked in, just as he had days before. Simple shirt, steady stride, worn backpack over his shoulder. But this time, he didn't need to say a word. Every eye followed him with quiet respect. Daniel stepped forward to greet him. They shook hands. "Welcome back, Mr. James." He smiled gently. "Just came to say thank you." The manager tried to begin the official speech, but James raised a hand. "No need for all that, son. I just want to say one thing." The room fell silent. He turned to Daniel and said, "This young man here was the only one who looked me in the eye without judging me by the dirt on my boots." Daniel felt his throat tighten. His co-workers started to clap, some with shame written all over their faces. Christopher stood by the counter, staring at the floor, wishing he could vanish. Like someone realizing too late that arrogance won't shield you from life's simplest lessons. James looked around the room and added, "I know a lot of folks here laughed, mocked me, but I'm not here to preach. I just want you to remember one thing. Not every man in an old hat is a fool, and not every new car goes farther than someone who carries gratitude in their heart." The words hit the room like an arrow. Christopher tried to approach, opened his mouth to apologize, but James had already turned to leave. He preferred to keep walking his road, the same way he always had. And before stepping out the door, he left one last seed. "People who treat others right always have a ride with me." That brief visit left a mark no amount of training could ever match. From that day on, the dealership became quieter. The coffee tasted more bitter, the laughter more restrained. There was a new kind of care in people's eyes, as if James's silence had re-educated their senses. Daniel was promoted months later, but between the bonus and the new title, he knew his biggest reward wasn't on his paycheck. It was on that Saturday on the Colombo Road, when he realized that promises made with faith can outlast time and return as victories to those who never lost their dignity. James's story spread far beyond town. Farmer markets, churches, union meetings, rural events. Everyone wanted to know who was the man who bought 7 pickup trucks and gave them away as if handing out pieces of his own past. But he, as always, stayed quiet, turned down interviews, ignored radio invites. "Those who live for applause forget the sound of the dirt," he would say. He preferred to watch, to stay in the background, to know he had planted something in people's hearts without showing his face. His faith was in the act, not the echo. One afternoon, Daniel showed up at the farm unannounced. James welcomed him with the same easy smile. "Came for coffee or to eat some dust, son," he joked, extending his hand. They sat in the shade of the tree, looking out at the 7 trucks lined up in front of the house, now washed but still smelling like the road. "I just wanted to say your story changed my life," Daniel said. James shrugged humbly. Come on, man. I just kept a promise." Daniel pressed on. "People forget fast." James looked down and replied, "But when we build with heart, not even time can erase it." The sun began to set, painting the fields in gold. The trucks gleamed like mirrors of a hard past, but a past full of real triumphs. And there, in that unhurried moment, Daniel understood something no sales manual could teach: that quiet gratitude is worth more than any ad campaign. That the greatest lessons come from those who lived through hardship. And that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And James's name? Oh, it would keep making the rounds. Not because of fame, but because he earned it. And maybe, somewhere out there, someone needed to be reminded that humility isn't the absence of wealth. It's the noblest way to carry your victories in your pocket without forgetting those who helped you stitch each one together. And so, with full eyes and a lighter heart, Daniel understood. Some stories don't end. They live on, in the dirt roads, in the silence, in the people lucky enough to witness them. Watch until the end and tell us, which part touched you the most? Hit like if you believe in the power of gratitude. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories that move and inspire. Every day, a new video. Every day, a new chance to believe again.